Hello, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Institute of Lutheran Theology. Today's lecture will be on Neoplatonism, and actually there's going to be two lectures on Neoplatonism. The first will deal basically with Plotinus, who was one of the greatest minds of antiquity, lived from 204 to 270. He is said to have synthesized Christian and Gnostic ideals with traditional Platonism. Well, you could say he might have done that. You might say that he didn't do that. Depends on the degree to which you think he's actually reading Christian and Gnostic ideas and actually using them in what he does. There are similarities, of course. He's probably the most influential philosopher in antiquity. While Ammonius Saccus is regarded as the founder of Neoplatonism, no writings of his survive, and Plotinus was in Ammonius's inner circle. And what we get with Plotinus is something much more worked out, much more complete. Although by all accounts, he was not a very good writer. And if you've ever tried to read Plotinus, I actually taught with a Plotinus scholar, there has to be a few, and he would tell me how hard it is to read Plotinus, and I thought to myself, well, I'll just read Plotinus. And Plotinus is not easy. Certainly in English it's not easy. Maybe he's better in Greek, I don't know. But by all accounts, he was not a good writer, prone to grammatical errors. He was a teacher. It came alive when he was in the classroom. When he wrote it down, maybe not quite as much. He claimed that all of reality is an emanation from the One. And we now have a word that I've been, trying to say. Well, actually, I've been trying not to say it, emanation, until we got to Plotinus. But of course, the earlier systems could be understood in this way as well. That there is something, here's the one, that emanates, that from it comes another thing. This one is good, and goodness diffuses from the one into the world, and everything down in the world that emanates from the one is an image, an external image of the internal activity of the one in some ways. He seems to hold what is called the Principle of Plenitude, which we have called the Principle of Plenitude. The Principle of Plenitude holds that everything that can come into existence does so at some time. And maximum cosmic beauty is achieved when everything that can come into existence does so. Now, later thinkers that you might connect this idea to would be found in German thought. Leibniz, for instance, maybe a Christian Wolff and others. But this is certainly a view of things that we don't immediately probably resonate to today. How can it be that cancer, which can come into existence and does, makes a more beautiful cosmos than if it weren't here? Well, so anyway, this is a presupposition. If you hold that maximum diversity is somehow coextensive with beauty, then you would hold to the Principle of Plenitude. But a lot of people, of course, wouldn't hold that. Existence is the external self-expression of the contemplative one or good. Okay, so existence is an expression of the one. And this divine, this existence that is an expression of the one is diminished in temporality. So being is filled here in the one, but as it expresses itself into the cosmos, there is a diminution of being, right? And the divine essence, of course, is diminished as it goes out of itself into the world. The cosmos is the self-expression of the soul, which we're going to talk about here as it relates to the one. The soul's experience of its own mind is the cosmos. So the one, of course, is going to go out of itself into nous, which goes out of itself into world soul. And somehow as nous goes out of itself and experiences itself, the cosmos itself comes into being. Evil is due to the soul's preoccupation with its own self-expression. And this preoccupation with its own self-expression gives rise to nature. Now, I'm not here to persuade you in any of these lectures to become Neoplatonics or followers of Numenius of Apamia. What I'm trying to show you, whoever watches these lectures, my students here at the Institute of Theology have to, is that there are hundreds of years of thinking, a particular batch of thoughts that are operating. From the time of Plato's death, well, actually he was still alive, up until the 5th century AD. And what I'm trying to show in these lectures is just how a bunch of guys are thinking things that are identifiable as a certain class of thinking. But of course, this is the stuff we don't study very much in philosophy. So when we run into doctrines like the Trinity or the two natures of Christ, we wonder how anyone could think these things. How could 3 be 1, for instance? Or 1 can be 3? Well, I mean, if you read Plotinus and these figures before, and if you were actively involved in the intellectual dialogues of the day, you would see that there is a sense in which, of course, 1 becomes 3, right? I mean, Christianity doesn't go against reason here and says, well, 1 becomes 3, but nobody else thinks so. Christianity, with its notion of the Father begetting the Son and the Holy Spirit proceeding from this, is running a certain kind of certain kind of thought that would not be a thought that would be unknown in the pagan world. Certainly not within the philosophical climate of the day. Okay, so the one is alone within itself and ineffable. The one generates a power that is at the same time both nous and the object of contemplation of nous. Okay, now so you got the one generating a power, okay, and when the one generates this power, which is involved in, it's part of the essence of the one to generate this, one goes over into nous. Now what I mean is the one begets nous, the one becomes nous, and the one thinks itself as itself. When the one thinks itself as itself, nous thinks itself as other than itself, if you can follow that. The one thinking itself as itself is nous, but then as the one thinks itself as itself, nous is actually thinking something other than itself. Now, if you've ever read Hegel, this stuff maybe doesn't seem so far-fetched, actually. This division within itself generates being and the principle of discursivity. Okay, so now the one gives rise to nous when the one thinks itself. That's can be seen as nous thinking that which is other than itself. Okay. When you consider the thoughts in themselves, this gives rise to the world soul or psyche. The psyche. From the world soul produces all souls themselves, actualization of forms, up here in the one. And what the soul is then, out here in the world, now we got world soul, now we have materiality. The world soul's locked in materiality. When a soul out here in materiality comes to an understanding of itself as part of this, then it realizes that nature is not alien to itself. When the soul understands the world and understands itself, it understands that the same divine ground upon which it stands is also the divine ground upon which nature stands. So there's a return. This externality is a return from the externality as the soul comes to an understanding that the other is its ownmost being. Nature is the soul's own act. Now, let's talk about logos, and let's try to put this in a little nicer form. We have the one, right, which overflows from itself into nous. We might say it emanates from itself. And nous, as the emanation of the one, is not complete without the one. Now, the world soul is the logos of nous. And the world soul is the logos of nous. And the nous is the logos of the one. Okay, now you got to think of the logos as this principle having a transcendent an element and an immanent element. The world soul is in some sense an image of the nous and is obscure. But the world soul, which is begotten by the nous, this is the language, loves the nous from which it is begotten. And the nous, which is begotten by the one, loves the one from which it is begotten. One might say that the nous is a hypostasis of the one. That's a standing under of the one. Hypostasis in Greek philosophy becomes identified as that which carries properties. Okay. The world soul is a hypostasis of the nous. Okay, so the world soul is a hypostasis of the nous. The nous is a hypostasis of the one. The logos, however, is not a hypostasis, but it is a relation between what begets and what is begotten. So as the one hypostasizes itself into the nous, the logos is being logos. And as the nous hypostasizes itself into the world soul, the logos is being logos. The logos, then, is the metaphysical principle by which lower realities emerge from higher realities. The one emanates nous, right here, right, through what was called a prohudros, or a precession, that's the Greek, which is a formless radiation of the one, in the nous. And then we have a radiation of the nous into world soul, but then we have not only a prohudros, which is a precession out, but an epistrophe, which is a reversion, a turning back of the nous upon itself. And as it turns back upon itself, it in some sense sends back to the one. So we have here a view of reality that it's like breathing. There's an exhaling of the one through logos to nous, to world soul, to matter. And then we're down here in matter with people like David and Bob and Doug and everybody running around. They're alienated, their souls are lost, forsaken. This is the true forsaken land out here in a Plotinus material field far away from the one. But there needs to be now there's an exhaling of the one, and then an inhaling back into the one. So reality is kind of like a breathing out and a breathing in, but it's not a temporal breathing out and breathing in, but an ontological breathing out and breathing in that is certainly beyond time. Okay, now the world soul contemplates nous, and reflecting upon this contemplation, nature and cosmos are produced. Now, cosmos, nature, materiality. As the world soul contemplates nous, see, look at again, I mean, think of the demiurge. You look up in order to create down. That's the play here. In reflecting upon this contemplation, we have nature and cosmos produced. Individual souls now, immersed in nature, are you ready for this? Are moments of the world soul's eternal act. Now, some of you who know Spinoza are thinking, oh my goodness, modes, right? We've got attributes, we've got modes, or maybe you're thinking Hegelian thoughts, and you should always, if you're thinking about Hegel, always run through Spinoza. My favorite way to Hegel is Hegel, back to Spinoza, back to these guys. Then you get it. Okay, individual souls immersed in nature are moments of the world soul's eternal act, and know the world soul and nous by reflecting upon the results of the world soul's act. Externalized, sensible entities comprising the cosmos. So, in this internal dynamic, externality comes into being. There is an alienation into externality, and then a climbing back the ladder out of externality through mystical knowledge, actually. Knowledge allows us to climb out of externality back into the one. Individual souls, however, can be lost forever. They can forget that they are moments within the world soul, and forget that the world soul is but a logicized hypostasis of nous, and forget that nous is but a logicized hypostasis of one. And they can identify themselves instead with the physical. Now the soul takes on characteristics that make it seem less divine. The individual soul now takes on accidents because of its preoccupation with the physical. It takes on properties of the physical. It starts thinking it has a personality. But see, it's that thought of personality, that separateness. It must forget this personality in order to realize, again, that it is but a manifestation, finally, a hypostatization of the one. The descent of the soul into materiality is a moment in the unfolding of nous, which, of course, we know is a hypostasis of one or God. This descent into externality and materiality is not itself evil, for it is the way of God. This is how God is. When God is being God, all this happens. It is the individual soul that experiences it as evil, and thus it is the fault of the individual soul if it remains lost. Now, Plotinus didn't like Gnosticism, and he certainly would have disliked Origen's account of evil. For Origen, great Christian theologian, the father of systematic theology maybe, souls pre-exist, and when they desire to create independently of God, they fall into error and languish there until the Logos becomes incarnate in Christ. Plotinus, however, accounts for the fall of the soul by pointing to the tension between pure contemplation and divisive action. And this pure contemplation and devising action is a tension that constitutes the natural mode of the soul's existence. The soul's thoughts are actualized only when expressed. The soul strives towards the one. And of course, the one is beyond predication. And we'll see that more as we look at the thinkers that follow. Through its actualization, and in becoming like the one, it becomes deeply itself. See, to become truly what you are is to realize your identity in the unfolding of God. The soul, in identifying with the one, the divine house from which it's now gone into this alien world, when it identifies with the one, it becomes most deeply itself. It has authentic existence. Plotinus did die, and he said his last words were, "Strive to bring back the God in yourselves to the God in the all." Which is very different than Luther's last words, right? We are beggars, that is all. Strive to bring back the God in yourselves to the God in the all. So, look at that. We have to strive, effort to bring back the God in yourselves to the God of all. Plotinus thought that salvation could only be achieved through philosophical teaching, dialectic. He claims that while life is good, because it is creative autonomy, it is the way of God to sojourn out in the world, so is death, right? Because it provides contemplative repose. When I'm breathing out, some of me goes out in the world, and if I'm good, I'm dispersing that breath out into the world. When I'm drawing it back in, I can repose in the fullness of my breath. And I disperse it again. It's wonderful stuff. At death, the soul is one with nous in some way that is beyond potentiality and actuality. Beyond the one and the many. Beyond the human and the divine. So I hear all of you saying, well, what is the achievement of Plotinus? See, over there, you're all saying this. Well, he succeeded in synthesizing Plato, or the mystical take on Plato, with peripatetic, Aristotelian, and Stoic rigor to make intelligible human existence. And if you've ever seen the Great Books edition, remember it came out of Chicago a number of years ago. I think Mortimer Adler was the editor. Remember this? Great Books. I saw him interviewed once on, what was it, the Dick Cavett show or something like that? Years and years ago. They said, what book would you leave out if you had to do it over again? And he said, Plotinus. He says, nobody can understand it. Nobody. If you have the great books at home, you probably haven't worked through these. Plotinus is concerned, like Aristotle, with the happiness, eudaimonia, of the human soul. A happiness that could be achieved through rationality, the intellect, by transcending the vicissitudes of temporality. The angst, the anxiety of human existence, is overcome through intellectual contemplation that transcends the distinction between the divine and human. Draw, if that can'ts, the mystic line, right? Separating is from thine. The words of Emerson. The perfected soul's contemplation of itself is at the same time a contemplation of the divine itself. Okay? So in contemplating, when you're through all illusion, you see things as they are, in contemplating yourself, you're contemplating the divine. Because you yourself are part of the divine. You're taken up. Plotinus' synthesis transcends Christian and Gnostic options. The world soul takes its own expressions into account, including souls, and comprehends them, takes them up as essential moments within itself. Okay, one more thinker here. Porphyry lived from 232 to 305, student of Plotinus, arranged his books into what are called the Enneads. He said that philosophy's goal is the salvation of the soul. He wrote 15 volumes against the Christians, so he didn't like the Christians very much. He wrote the Isagoge, an introduction to Aristotle's categories, developed a doctrine of the ascent of the soul to nous by doing of good works. He held that there was a gradual process towards perfection instead of this intellectual enlightenment that could be, for Plotinus, more or less instantaneous. He was a Christian early in life, and then he gave it up. Like Origen, he held that there is an objective relation and distance between the soul and nous. Porphyry claims that the divine mind is different from that of the soul, but that the soul can become like the divine mind by the practice of virtue. Okay? The divine mind is different from that of the soul, but the soul become like the divine mind. Have you heard this play before, right? The saved soul forever contemplates the one. Well, I mean, Plotinus could have almost said that. Porphyry agrees with traditional Greek religion and Christianity in placing human beings in a cosmic hierarchy. The gods are higher than us, so that's part of the chain of being. Our next thinker is Iamblichus of Apamea, who lived from 245 to 325, studied under Porphyry. Of course, we could say a lot more about Porphyry. He was a very important figure. I've said hardly anything. But I've probably said enough for this group of lectures within a course dealing with philosophical underpinnings of Christian theology. Iamblichus is a representative of what Syrian Neoplatonism. They had some occult and magical elements. And he elaborated on these hypostases towards a greater complexity. Now, he talks about a supreme one behind or above Plotinus's one. Some of you are thinking, well, what about Speusippus and Xenocrates? Well, yes, in Plato, they were running some of the same questions before their minds. This one, this supreme one above this one, is beyond all predication and determination. Iamblichus talks about a cosmic all-soul that it has, and then both a rational and irrational soul. He claims a whole bunch of spiritual beings between the lower souls and the intellectual order, believes that the individual souls are lower than and subject to the high God, now figured as the supreme one. The question of transcendence arises here. Plotinus assumed that the highest truth is discursive, that the dialectic's use of language can attain to it, okay? If any representation of truth by the soul is a representation of the one. So, I mean, he holds on to language. But Porphyry and Iamblichus reject Plotinus' quest for transcendence as possible only for the few. Porphyry wants to talk about virtue as a way to reach the one, and Iamblichus, in some of his writings, even resorts to ritual to do so. Both sanction the practice of astrology, something rejected by Plotinus, and of course Iamblichus claims that the one transcends all language, which Dionysius the Areopagite would have agreed to. I'm going to take a short break here, and I'll be right back with you.